A girl is locked in a room with lots of phones, and when she picks up the receiver, the room starts to fill with water. Reese finds herself in a small room lined with white telephones on all the walls. One of the phones is black, and on its receiver, she notices a sticker with an unknown number. Reese decides to dial the number, but an automated voice responds, saying she's won a royal flush. She hangs up, but then the other phones start ringing, and each one announces royal flush. Suddenly, water begins pouring from all the receivers, quickly flooding the room. In a panic, Reese tries to figure out what to do. Realizing that royal flush might be a clue, she looks up and sees a toilet on the ceiling. Reese figures out she needs to reach the toilet and flush the water away, so she starts climbing up the phones. When she reaches the toilet, she notices that it lacks a flush handle. Rereading the sticker with the number, she guesses which phone she needs and dives for it. After dialing the number on that phone, it opens, revealing the flush handle inside. Reese attaches the handle to the toilet and finally manages to flush the water out. The water drains instantly, and the automated voice congratulates her on completing the challenge.
Congratulations, you've escaped.
It turns out that the entire dangerous quest was just a virtual reality game. Reese removes her VR headset and sensors at a specialized center among other gamers and heads home. At home, Reese discusses the game with her friends in a chat and then joins her father, Chris, for dinner. They chat about their day, enjoying burgers, and remember their wife and mother, who passed away a few years ago. Suddenly, their home and the entire city experience an unexplained short circuit. Power and communication are lost, and all the electronics, including Reese's computer, catch fire. Fortunately, Reese manages to extinguish the computer before the fire spreads. Later, Chris brings a lamp into the living room and comments that the power outage might be good for Reese, as it gives her a break from her virtual reality. However, Reese is concerned that the internet is down and she can't find out what's happening in the city. She recalls that her grandfather Frank has a book about batteries and power lines that might help them. But Chris asks her to put those thoughts aside, considering Frank to be a bit of an eccentric for moving to a mountain cabin and always preparing for an unknown disaster. They then look through old photos and videos on an iPad and soon fall asleep on the couch in the living room. In the middle of the night, Reese wakes up to a strange flash outside the window. Reese takes the lamp and heads outside to the yard, then makes her way to her grandfather's workshop to find the book. She quickly spots a book titled RadioFlash on a shelf, which discusses the collapse of North American power grids. She learns that a radio flash refers to an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, and the term originated in the 1950s, describing the click that radios picked up after a nuclear bomb explosion. Reese decides to repair her grandfather's old radio equipment, which has been gathering dust in the workshop. She manages to fix it quickly and sends out a signal, hoping to get some information from her grandfather. We then move to Frank at his radio station. He's listening to various messages about the electricity situation when he notices a signal from his home equipment. He happily responds to Reese, who asks if the outage is indeed a radio flash or an EMP. Frank confirms her suspicion and then asks to speak with Chris. Reese explains that her father is asleep, so Frank requests that Chris contact him in the morning. He also insists that Reese and Chris must leave their home and come to him. Frank explains to Reese where to find a map with a marked route and a radio that works only within a 5-mile radius. The radio will help them reach his place, but it needs to be charged using a generator found in the workshop. Reese realizes that her grandfather prepared all these items for a reason, indicating he expected such a disaster.
Should I be scared?
However, Frank reassures them that everything will be fine because they have a plan. After speaking with his granddaughter, he heads to an abandoned store to stock up on medicine. At the same time, looters break into the store in search of illegal substances. Fortunately, they take what they need and leave, and Frank pays for the medicine at the checkout before returning to his mountain cabin. In the morning, Reese wakes her father and tells him about her conversation with her grandfather. She explains that they need to go to him and shows him the book on radio flashes. However, Chris refuses to leave, claiming that Frank has gone mad with his doomsday theories. Despite this, Reese manages to persuade her father to at least talk to Frank. She contacts her grandfather, and at Chris's request, steps out of the workshop. Once Chris is alone, Frank reveals the truth about the situation. He explains that the EMP has left the entire western part of the U.S. without power. He also warns that chaos will begin in a couple of days, and Chris and Reese need to reach his mountain cabin as soon as possible, as he has everything they need to survive for a long time. After hearing Frank, Chris changes his mind about him, and he and Reese start preparing for the trip. Meanwhile, on the street, police are trying to convince town residents that the power outage is planned, but people don't believe them and realize they need to prepare for the worst. Soon, Chris and Reese set out on their journey. Along the way, they find the only open store and stop to get supplies. However, seeing crowds of people fighting over food and water, they decide not to risk it and continue on. After some time, Chris and Reese reach a bridge and encounter a traffic jam caused by an accident. Tired of waiting, they decide to get closer to the scene to see if anyone needs help, and Reese spots a lifeless body of a woman on the road. At that moment, one of the drivers loses his temper and rams his car into a vehicle blocking the road. People immediately follow him, and Chris and Reese rush back to their car to continue their journey. At night, Reese wakes up to realize that her father missed a crucial turn. Distracted while checking the map, Chris nearly collides with a truck in the middle of the road. He loses control and ends up veering off the road and crashing into a tree. In the morning, Chris comes to. Thankfully, Reese is unharmed, but Chris has seriously injured his head and left side, though he insists he's fine. Realizing they have about 20 miles left to reach her grandfather's house, they gather their essentials from the car and decide to walk along the river. After a while, they reach a waterfall and stop to rest, but Chris's condition worsens. Reluctantly, he shows Reese his injuries, revealing a massive bruise and a serious wound on his arm. Chris pretends to be fine, but Reese is deeply worried about him. As they continue, Chris suddenly collapses from exhaustion. He asks Reese to get help and then loses consciousness. Shaken, Reese soon reaches a nearby farm and meets a man named Glenn, who agrees to help. He takes Chris to his home and provides first aid. Glenn also shares his thoughts on the disaster and tells Reese about his wife, who is stranded with relatives on the other side of the country. Later, Reese goes outside to get water, and when she returns, she learns the terrible news. Her father has unexpectedly stopped breathing. That night, Glenn helps Reese bury her father and then decides to take her to her grandfather's place in his van. Meanwhile, Frank is worried that Reese and Chris haven't arrived yet. He heads out to meet them and soon finds the accident site. Following Reese's trail, he reaches Glenn's house. Frank breaks in and, after a thorough inspection of the house and yard, discovers red stains on the couch and a fresh grave. Realizing something has happened to Chris or Reese, he decides to continue the search. On the way, Glenn spots a man standing in the middle of the road asking for help. Glenn, wary of the stranger, tells Reese to hide in the back of the van but stops anyway. Unfortunately, Glenn's suspicion proves correct. The stranger, after checking the van and seeing there's enough fuel, pulls out a gun and demands that Glenn get out. Glenn complies, but the stranger immediately shoots him and steals the van. Shocked, Reese remains hidden inside the van, trying not to give herself away. Soon, the stranger drives to an abandoned gas station surrounded by dozens of abandoned cars. The man sneaks inside, hoping to steal fuel, but is shot by a hunter. The hunter drags the stranger's body to his vehicle, and Reese seizes the opportunity to escape from the van. However, she doesn't get far before the same hunter catches up with her and puts a sack over her head. When Reese regains consciousness, she finds herself in an unfamiliar house, facing an elderly woman named Ma. Ma accuses Reese of trespassing and suddenly insists that Reese stay for dinner with her family. Meanwhile, Frank discovers Glenn's body on the road. He recognizes him from the photos he saw at the house and realizes that Reese is in danger. At dinner, Ma introduces Reese to her son Bill, the hunter, and her reclusive grandson Quinn, and serves her bear meat. Reese tells Ma about the power outage everywhere and her urgent need to reach her grandfather. Ma, however, insists that the forest is too dangerous and persuades Reese to stay with them for the night, offering her a place to sleep in the attic. That night, after waiting for Ma to fall asleep, Reese cautiously descends from the attic and heads for the exit. However, the sound of the door opening wakes Ma, who immediately sends her son after Reese. Reese manages to escape the house but is soon stopped by Bill and Quinn. Bill demands that Quinn grab her, but Quinn just stands there, staring at Reese. Bill then gets out of the car and starts beating his son before kidnapping Reese again. Later, Reese comes to, bound in a sack that Bill hangs from a tree. She spends the night in the sack, and in the morning, through a small hole, she sees a bear attracted by the human scent. The bear tries to reach Reese, but then the hunter shoots it, revealing that he had used Reese as bait for the animal. Bill then locks the bound Reese in a barn, and the next day, he takes her to Ma, who offers her tea. Ma tries to convince Reese that she wants to help her and suggests that Reese choose either Bill or Quinn as a partner, noting that they are tired of living alone. Ma also warns Reese that if she refuses to stay with them willingly, she'll have to return to the barn. I'd rather be back in this cellar. The next night, Reese is tied up in the barn. Suddenly, Quinn slides an apple in Reese's backpack through the opening. Reese tries to stop him, but he quickly runs away. Reese grabs the radio and tries to contact her grandfather, but she can't get through. She then pulls out her iPad, which has only 3% battery left, and watches old videos of her parents. Soon, the tablet dies, and Reese starts thinking about how to free herself. She cuts through the rope with tools found in the barn and tries to pick the lock with a homemade lock pick. Suddenly, Reese notices that Quinn is still watching her and asks him for help. She tells him that she really needs to escape and that she can take him with her, but he is afraid to leave his controlling and cruel relatives. Reese asks Quinn to get the key to the lock, but he says that Ma always keeps it with him. Reese realizes there must be another way to escape. She then notices the rotting boards that make up the barn and comes up with a plan. Quinn climbs onto the roof with a rope and immediately falls through into the barn. Using the rope tied outside, they manage to escape. Quinn finally decides to run away from home, and he and Reese run as far as possible from his insane relatives. In the morning, Bill discovers that Quinn and Reese have escaped and immediately sets out after them, tracking their route by footprints and broken branches. Meanwhile, Reese and Quinn stop to rest and eat some berries. Quinn says that his father is probably already chasing them and that they should go back, or he'll kill them both. But Reese doesn't want to let Quinn go. She assures him that they are almost there and that her grandfather will take care of them. Suddenly, they hear Bill's footsteps and immediately take off. On the way, Quinn nearly falls off a cliff, but Reese manages to hold him back. Then they spot a fallen tree acting as a bridge and carefully cross it to the other side of the cliff. Reese decides to take off her backpack for balance but accidentally drops her water. Just as they manage to cross the chasm, Bill opens fire, but the pair manages to hide behind a log. They then come across a small pond, but Bill continues to pursue them. To shake the hunter, they have to submerge themselves in the water and wait for Bill to pass. Soon, they emerge from the water, but Bill spots them quickly and chases them again. Quinn comes up with a plan and waits behind a rock to ambush his father with a stick. Bill drops his gun, and a fight ensues between him and Quinn. Reese grabs the gun and takes a precise shot at Bill, but it turns out that it wasn't Reese who shot Bill, but Frank, who has finally found his granddaughter.
It's okay, sweetie.
After some time, Frank, Reese, and Quinn have settled into a peaceful routine at their cabin in the woods. They're managing daily chores and keeping their supplies replenished. Frank has successfully tracked down Reese's backpack and repaired her tech, though she now finds herself more engaged with the tangible world around her rather than the digital one. One day, as Quinn curiously examines the iPad, he notices an unusual flurry of notifications, which means that their normal life is beginning to return. What would you do if you suddenly found yourself in a world without electricity? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, give the video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.